When any government, or any church for that matter, undertakes to say to its subjects, "This you may not read, this you must not see, this you are forbidden to know," the end result is tyranny and oppression, no matter how holy the motives. And that quote comes from Robert A. Heinlein. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Igan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I'll be your host for the next hour. And folks, it would seem that our governments are certainly telling us there are a very large number of things that we may not do. Interestingly, in America, we are seeing what appears to be the government telling its citizens that something that they may not do is leave the country. We've seen a new bill introduced which says that if you owe any back taxes, if you owe the IRS any money at all, then you will not be allowed to leave the country. And we're also seeing a new House resolution. They just keep churning them out, folks, virtually pumping them out like sausages. And the latest House resolution we've seen from Obama is Bill H.R. 1505, which is the new U.S. Border Security Bill. And what this bill is going to do is that it's going to create a 100-mile buffer zone around the country. I mean, I'm not sure if they've tricked the American people into believing that, well, we've been having all this trouble with Canada for all these years and that they may well get invaded by Canada. But what they are doing is they are establishing a 100-mile buffer zone where there will be drones flying around in the sky and there will be helicopter pads. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were to put up a barbed wire fence and watchtowers, folks, to be quite honest. And what we really seem to be seeing is America's new modern high-tech version of their very own Iron Curtain that they are currently in the process of erecting around the entire United States. But what this bill basically does, folks, is it creates a 100-mile buffer zone along the southern and the northern borders, which includes 15 national parks and nearly 25% of the overall footprint of the US national park system. It puts all of this land into the control of, guess who? Your best friends, Homeland Security, and basically suspends the enforcement of almost all the US environmental laws upon any lands that are under the jurisdiction of the Department of Interior and Agriculture within 100 miles of the border between Mexico and the United States and the border between Canada and the United States. Now, I don't think it's actually gone through yet, but it's definitely on the table. And this is just the sort of stuff that they are doing, folks, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if it does come through. And, of course, if it doesn't, well, they'll just repackage it and they'll bring it in later, because that's the way they always do it. But it really would seem that the United States government is in the process of erecting what amounts to an Iron Curtain around their country. And they've been moving towards this for a while, folks, and even with this move, you won't really see it played out to its fullest degree at the moment. It's just done in gradual increments, and it's a very slow and very ongoing process. But what we see here is a further tightening of the noose. You see, America's gone, folks. It's absolutely gone. The United States that we knew and that we thought we knew is no longer there. But then it's not just the United States, of course. It's also happening here in Australia, and it's also happening in Canada. It's happening in New Zealand. It's happening in England. In fact, every country that the Crown Corporation has ever touched is getting locked down more and more and more. All the countries are being manoeuvred into positions where they are becoming interdependent upon each other, so that economic sovereignty and self-sustainability can never be achieved by any country. All the industries are being removed from these countries because that's a good way to get people involved in the war machine. I mean, obviously when people have to pay to be alive and the only job that's available is in the military, well, the options of the citizens are very limited as to what else they can do in order to collect the paper that they need in order to exist on Earth. And heaven forbid there should be any race that exists on the Earth that isn't required to collect paper in order to do so. All hail the joys of a fictional economic system. And of course, this is also a good way to get people involved in the mining industry, folks. Just pay them obscene amounts of paper in order to go out and destroy the planet, and of course ensure that there are very little other jobs that will pay you obscene amounts of paper. I mean, that's just the way the system has been designed. It's very clever, folks. It really is clever, the way it's been put together. But unfortunately, what it is leading to is the complete breakdown of the entire system, both ecologically and socially. And in a very, very short time, folks, a matter of a couple of decades, the world is going to be an extremely different place to what it is now. And it will indeed be very, very tightly controlled. And this is just the way it's heading, folks. This is just the way the world's going. And it's going to continue heading in this direction until the people of the planet wake up to what's going on and choose to stand up and do something about it. And we've had all sorts of people looking at ways that they can do something about it. Many people have been going down all sorts of avenues with things such as the free man movement, the trust law movements, the sovereign movements, and even the Occupy movement. I mean, there's all sorts of things that people have been getting involved in an attempt to extricate themselves from this system. Of course, it's a very tricky process, but the point is that there are lots and lots of people now that are realizing that they are caught up within the web of a fictional system. And they've been basically bound into a corporate system that they never knew they were involved in, that they never asked to be involved in, and so people are looking for ways to extricate themselves from it. And that's why we're seeing so many people jump on the bandwagon, so to speak, with all of these movements. That's why we saw the Occupy movement attract so many people, because everybody knows there's something wrong, and they're just all looking for the way out. And look, all of these law movements are good, and we need to be investigating all of these things. But as I've said time and time again, what we really need to do is to occupy ourselves. Because when we do fully occupy ourselves, and we fully understand what we are, and we see other people around us as being as valid as we are, then the barriers between ourselves and our neighbours and the people in our community break down. And it's when we have this power of community, we can take the world in any direction we want. We can change everything if the community demands that it's changed. If the government enacts legislation and the community doesn't like that legislation, if the community stands up en masse and demands that that legislation be revoked and removed, and possibly even that the person who enacted it be held accountable, then there's very little that the powers that be can do, because they have to follow the demands of the people. But this only happens if the people stand united. And therein lies the key, folks. This is what I've been saying for years. You've got to have this united community. The power of a united community can achieve virtually anything, folks, and it can do so without the need of violence, simply through the sheer weight of numbers. And if violence is instigated against an empowered community by the powers that be, then the strength of numbers in the community has the ability to repel virtually any violent act that's brought against it because of the sheer strength of numbers. I mean, violence must, of course, sometimes be used, but only in order to repel violence. Now, you only ever need to show enough force to repel that force which is attacking you. It's when you then make the mistake of going on the attack, you begin to become that which you are fighting against. And that's where you have to draw the line. But of course, in all of these things that I'm saying with the power of community and non-violent non-compliance, I'm not saying don't defend yourself if you're attacked. I mean, of course, if you are attacked, you should absolutely defend yourself. But you should never become the attacker, because to do so simply compounds the problem. I mean, take the American War of Independence, for example. The American War of Independence was basically fought because the British Empire was inflicting itself upon the American people, and the American people repelled that attack. But they didn't then go on to build a navy and go and attack England. They didn't become that which they hate, or that which they were defending themselves against. And this is the way you need to approach reality around you, folks. You can always repel an attack, but you don't need to then become the attacker. Though, of course, folks, even when you do defend yourself when you're attacked, it's often misconstrued by the authorities and taken as an attack against the authorities rather than an act of self-defense. Just a few days ago here in the town that I live, there was some young guys out at night. They'd probably had a little bit to drink, and they were being a little bit disorderly, but nothing too bad. And the police kind of approached the young men, and they escalated the situation to the point where one of the police officers pulled out capsicum spray and sprayed one of the young men in the eyes. The young man is incidentally still in hospital, suffering severe burns to his eyes. And when his mates jumped to his defence, suddenly we had an article in the paper the next day how a group of violent youths had attacked the police, and now they're calling for camera surveillance systems to be put all around the town. And what we see here, of course, folks, is a classic case of problem, reaction, solution, because the police escalated the problem to the point where it became violent. I mean, the police were the ones who started the violence by producing capsicum spray and spraying the eyes of a young man. And of course, folks, this is terrorism. This is absolutely terrorism, because capsicum spray, things such as this, are for police to be able to defend themselves against violent offenders. But what you find is that with things such as capsicum spray and with tasers, police are using these devices in order to force people to comply with their wishes. Now, if you look up the definition of terrorism in the Oxford English Dictionary, terrorism is defined as violence or the threat of violence carried out against civilians as a means of coercion, often for political reasons. This is exactly what the police are doing in order to force the citizens to comply with their wishes. They're not defending themselves against violence, folks. They are using these devices to force people into compliance. And this is terrorism by definition. The Oxford English Dictionary, folks, this is the dictionary that defines the English language. And according to that dictionary, that is what terrorism is. And folks, even by making a demand of someone, a police officer who makes a demand of someone is actually exercising a right of ownership. And we have slavery clauses in all of our countries that forbid anyone from being compelled to perform any task or action against their will by any other individual. And this is what the police are doing. They are exercising a right of ownership, and if people fail to comply, then the police are resorting to terrorism in order to coerce them into compliance. And this is exactly what's happening on our streets. And people need to wake up to it, and they need to start making noise about this sort of stuff, folks. And if a police officer does attempt to exercise a right of ownership over you, then you need to let him know that you intend to hold him accountable, and that you'll be holding the person within the uniform accountable, the man within the uniform. You're not taking action against the New York Police Department or whoever it is. You are going to be taking action against Mr. John Smith, whatever the officer's name is. You're going to be taking action against that man, the man within the uniform, and you are going to be holding him accountable for his actions, because you will find that in every country you have anti-slavery legislation which will clearly state that you may not be compelled to perform any task or action against your will. And this is regardless of what legislation's been put in place, folks. And you've got to understand that any police officer that does resort to violence when violence has not been used against him is a terrorist. Pure and simple, folks. And people need to start viewing things in this way, and they need to be making complaints about these people, but doing it through the right avenues. A good way, you will have some sort of an ombudsman, some sort of a watchdog body in your country. Here we have an organisation called Ethical Standards, where if a police officer exercises a right of ownership over me, I'm able to contact Ethical Standards and let them know. I also contact the highest law in the land, which is the Attorney General, and I let him know. And I also contact someone like the Police Insurance Ombudsman in order to let the insurance company that insures the police officer know what this police officer is getting up to. Because if you inform a police officer's insurance company of the actions of the officer, then it will affect the officer's ability to insure himself, and an uninsured police officer is unable to work on the police force. So there are all these avenues that you can take, but you've got to approach these people in the right way. You've got to talk to them in the right way, and and you've got to stand firm in your convictions. Be polite, don't be aggressive, and take the correct avenues in order to deal with them, because once you start doing things this way, once you've registered a few complaints against police officers, you'll find the rest of the force pretty well leaves you alone, because you found the way to actually affect them where it means something, and that is to affect their employment, which is, of course, to affect their means of collecting paper. And they don't like it when you stop the paper flow, folks. So that's the approach that people need to have.